back. But this is a conflict without traditional front lines, and fighting is taking place on multiple fronts. Civilians have been fleeing the area, seeking shelter in Goma or around nearby UN bases.
Some news just in. New figures show that the British economy is still in recession. Gross domestic product fell by 0.7% between April and June. It's the third quarter in a row that the British economy has shrunk, making the country's so-called double-dip recession the longest in 50 years. Meanwhile, Japan has posted its biggest ever trade deficit for the first 6 months of the year. The main reason was the need to import oil and liquefied natural gas to fuel power stations. Mariko Oi reports from Tokyo.
Today's figures show that Japan spent nearly $40 billion more on imports than selling products abroad in the first 6 months of this year, which is a record trade deficit for the world's third largest economy. That's because Japan has tried to stop relying on nuclear energy since the accident in Fukushima in March last year. Nuclear power used to supply almost a third of its electricity, so the country has been importing more oil and liquefied natural gas to fill the gap.
World News from the BBC. A US government watchdog has warned that changes in the way Afghan security forces are assessed could lead to an overestimation of their readiness to take over security when international troops withdraw. The US Government Accountability Office said that under the old standards, Afghan units were given top marks only if they could function completely independently. But since last August, they get the same grade even if they have to call for coalition support. The Burmese opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi has spoken in Parliament for the first time, appealing for laws to protect the rights of Burma's ethnic minorities. The recently elected veteran activist rose from her seat to support a motion by a ruling party MP. She said the flames of war from ethnic conflicts had not been completely extinguished. The first event in the 2012 London Olympics gets underway today, Wednesday, a full 2 days before the Games are officially opened. Great Britain play New Zealand in the women's football competition at the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff, followed by Cameroon versus Brazil in the same group. Earlier in their final report before the opening on Friday, the organisers of the Olympics promised a magical atmosphere. An investigation is underway in Britain after an 11-year-old boy succeeded in boarding a flight for Rome on his own without a ticket, passport or boarding pass. The child is said to be obsessed with planes and had run away from home. He's now been returned safely to his parents, as Nick Ravenscroft reports.
Because Liam Corcoran went through scanning devices to check for any potentially dangerous items being taken on board, the airport says the safety of the plane was not compromised. But the 11-year-old's lack of a passport wasn't picked up in the terminal or as Liam was boarding the plane at the departure gate. Even though he didn't have a boarding pass either, he managed to mingle with another family, and no accurate head count was made before takeoff. It was only mid-flight, en route to Rome, that other passengers became concerned and alerted cabin crew.
BBC News.
This is World Update from London. From the BBC World Service, I'm Dan Damon. And in this half hour of our show, all change in Beijing. Officials are criticised for mismanaging floods that left dozens dead. Also, does hosting the Olympic Games actually deter tourism?
Barcelona, the pin-up boy for Olympic tourism, suffered a decline in tourists around the Games, and Sydney, which had a wonderful Games, it had one of the best Games ever, even that Games saw a decline in tourism for the 3 years subsequent to it.
But are we downhearted? No, because the sun is shining in London and the Olympics begins, at least the competitions today. We'll hear about the Malaysian shooter grabbing her gun ahead of the Games, even though she's just weeks away from her pregnancy due date.
Some of the people say that I'm crazy. Some of the people say that I'm too selfish. But I just ignore what others say. I just concentrate on what I dream of.
Another remarkable Olympic tale, and you'll hear plenty of those here on the BBC World Service. Well, let's turn to our first story from Ghana, where there's a new president today. John Dramani Mahama has been sworn in after the death of his predecessor, John Atta Mills. He died at the age of 68. Let's talk to Elizabeth Ohene, who's in Accra. Tell us first about the new president, please, Elizabeth.
President John Dramani Mahama was the vice president to President Mills, who has just died. His he's just in his early 50s. He's comes from a political family. His father was a minister in the First Republic. That was President Kwame Nkrumah's government. And he's, I don't know if it matters, but maybe it's often said that he's a Christian from the north. But what is interesting about him really is that he's a very media savvy and media friendly person. The media just love him, and because he deals with them, he talks very well. He's a great communicator. Those are his main strong points.
And what arrangements are being made for the interment of John Atta Mills?
We don't know yet, but yesterday the new president, on being sworn in, declared a week of national mourning. And of course, flags are all at half-mast. And you would see, I don't think many Ghanaians needed to be told, but you will notice today that many people are in mourning clothes. They are in black with a dash of red mostly, which is a normal traditional mourning for particularly when somebody dies suddenly, or a great man dies, a big man dies. That's what we do. That's our traditional mourning clothes. So we didn't need to be told, but you will see that many people, I'm sure, I've seen it in Accra, I'm sure it's happening all around the country. And then the funeral arrangements will be announced. And then we tend to do funerals on a very grand scale in Ghana for anybody. Even if I died, I'll be guaranteed a great funeral, never mind the President of the Republic.
Let's hope that's a long way in the future, Elizabeth. But tell us about the cause of death now of the former president. There was some reluctance to say what that was. Has it been confirmed?
There still is reluctance, as there has been, about the fact that he was ill at all. Throughout, I think the day on which the president was sworn in, on the 7th of January 2009, the ceremony, it was obvious at the ceremony that he wasn't feeling well. He was stumbling over his words, which he normally was a very articulate lecturer, a law professor. And those who knew him very well knew that wasn't him at all. And throughout, he had lost a lot of weight. And he was gradually deteriorating before our very eyes. But they wouldn't admit that he was ill. And indeed, I know definitely at 2-3 press conferences, he was asked directly about his health, because there were rumors that he had cancer, throat cancer. And he said no, he was well, he was fit, he said. And indeed, the most dramatic one was a few weeks ago in June, when rumors spread around the country that the president had died. And a week later, he emerged and said he was fine. He was going to the United States for a routine medical checkup. He came back, came off the plane, and started jogging at the airport, if only to convince the whole country that he was well. So that has been it. But then, particularly in the past 2 weeks, it was obvious to anybody that the president was very ill. Last Saturday was his birthday. And there was a scene on national television of the presidential press corps going in to sing happy birthday to him. And he looked awful.
Right. Well, we know how awful now. Thank you very much indeed, anyway, for filling us in on the details of the new president, and still waiting for news of the funeral of President John Atta Mills, who died at the age of 68. That was Elizabeth Ohene in Accra. You're listening to World Update from the BBC. Syrian opposition sources are reporting that thousands of government troops are on the move from the border with Turkey to the country's second city of Aleppo. The rebels are thought still to control several parts of that city. Meanwhile, Brigadier General Manaf Tlas, the most senior defector from Syria's armed forces, has spoken today, calling for citizens to champion democracy in a post-Assad era.
أتحدث إليكم ليس كمسؤول بل كأحد أبناء سوريا.
I speak to you not as an official, but as one of the